I worked for Steve Jobs. I saw some crazy things, but Elizabeth took it to a level that I've never seen before.
Welcome to MsMojo, and today we're discussing the shocking true story of the dropout, Elizabeth Holmes.
It's highly useful information people should begin to understand because it'll change their life.
For this video, we're looking at the most dramatic real-life events that inspired Hulu's The Dropout. Do you plan on watching the series? Drop us a line in the comments. Early life. In the early to mid-2010s, Silicon Valley entrepreneur Elizabeth Holmes was suddenly on the cover of magazines and speaking at major conferences. She captivated leaders and audiences alike with her goal of revolutionizing blood testing and the healthcare industry at large.
I wanted to do something with my life that people thought was impossible before.
But this passionate visionary turned out to be a master fraudster who swindled millions out of investors and put patients' lives at risk. How did an inexperienced college dropout become a biotech billionaire? From a young age, Elizabeth Holmes had big aspirations.
We used to come up with concepts of companies that we would build together when we were like 2 and 4 with little stuffed animals or Lego blocks and all this kind of stuff.
Coming from a successful family, there was a lot to live up to. But Holmes was determined. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C. before her family relocated to Houston, Texas. Both of her parents worked in government, and her father, Christian, was also once the vice president of Enron. Their lineage was also a powerful one, but the generational wealth had dried up over time, much to the family's dismay.
They helped found the New Yorker magazine and bought Coconut Island off the coast of Hawaii. They entertained Amelia Earhart, and Shirley Temple had a birthday party on their estate. But the fortune was no more.
They were still well off, to be sure. But according to former neighbor Joseph Fuse, the Holmeses wanted to recapture their former glory.
There's no doubt in my mind that for Elizabeth, the notion of becoming this family champion and restoring them to grandeur is part of who Elizabeth is.
Going to Stanford. As a high school student, Holmes managed to talk her way into attending Stanford University's summer Mandarin program by showing off her already impressive language skills.
Courses that weren't open to high schoolers.
And she convinced people that, let her do it. She talked Mandarin on the phone to them, and they were stunned, and she got in.
After graduating, she began her chemical engineering studies at the university. There, she shared a business idea with a professor named Dr. Phyllis Gardner.
And I was on boards of companies, many private and public companies. And I started a couple of companies. So I tend to be sought out by kids who have an interest in business.
Holmes wanted to create a patch that would check blood levels and administer medication as needed. Dr. Gardner told the 19-year-old that it wasn't scientifically possible, but Holmes was relentless.
How did she respond to the criticism?
Just kind of blinked her eyes and nodded and left, and then came back another time with the same sort of concept.
She then turned to Channing Robertson, an engineering professor who was also the chair of the department. He actually thought she was brilliant and supported her ideas.
Maybe once a century you come across someone like Beethoven. She's a Beethoven figure. He said, she is a genius. She is this rare creature, and he bet his career on it.
In 2003, Holmes founded Theranos, a mix of the terms therapy and diagnosis. And it wasn't long before she dropped out of Stanford to pursue the business full-time.
I was at a point where another few classes in chemical engineering was not necessary for what I wanted to do.
Steve Jobs dropped out of college, Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college, Bill Gates dropped out of college.
But instead of the patch, she ultimately shifted her focus to developing a blood analyzing machine. Inspired by her own fear of needles, Holmes wanted to create a process that made blood testing less painful, less expensive, and more widely available. Rather than tubes of blood taken from a vein, this would only need drops from a finger prick.
The ability to be able to use a pinprick and test you right there in a doctor's office or even in a battlefield is revolutionary. It changes everything.
I said, this could be the Holy Grail.
Building Theranos. As the first board member of Theranos, Channing Robertson helped Holmes connect with venture capitalists. Her first major investor was family friend Tim Draper, who gave her $1 million.
I was the first investor in Tesla, first investor in Skype, first investor in Baidu, first investor in Hotmail. I always invest early. I invest when I see the vision, I see the opportunity, and I see the person who I think can make it there.
By the end of 2004, early 2005, she had about $6 million in funding. And in the following years, she landed several high-profile investors, including Rupert Murdoch, Walmart's Walton family, and Larry Ellison.
The cash is designed to give Theranos engineers a long runway to perfect the Edison and someday bring it to market.
One of Holmes's heroes was Apple CEO Steve Jobs. So much so that she convinced his former colleague and friend Avi Tavanian to invest and join the board.
She was definitely selling me on a vision for what she wanted to do in this realm of blood testing and making it something that was much more accessible than it's ever been.
She also got iPhone designer Anna Ariola to be the chief design architect for the Edison, the small machine meant to process the nanotainers of blood. Holmes even asked Ariola for style tips, eventually creating her version of Jobs' signature look. But the two former Apple employees caught on to her act. When they separately questioned the shady goings-on, they were challenged and essentially forced to resign.
He said, Elizabeth would like you to resign from the board, cutting to the chase. He literally said, you asked too many questions. And
Were you surprised that he said, I'd like for you to resign?
She had already poisoned the well.
Investors and board members. Amid financial troubles both in the United States and at Theranos, businessman and investor Ramesh Sunny Balwani joined Theranos in 2009.
He's a software engineer, a seasoned veteran of Silicon Valley startups, and is already worth $40 million.
His money saved the company, and he soon became the chief operating officer and president. He was also dating Elizabeth, having met many years prior in Beijing. However, they kept their romantic relationship a secret.
I think Sonny saw her as this iconic figure that, he could never be. And so he, I think, found this vehicle for him to advance himself in her. And, she was on board for it too.
When former Secretary of State George Shultz joined the board in 2011, he brought on more government heavyweights.
Those powerful men could influence people in the government, influence the Department of Defense.
They included former Senator Samuel Nunn, former Defense Secretaries William Perry and Jim Mattis, and another former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The company was criticized for having what was essentially an all-male board with backgrounds in politics and the military.
It's you and a bunch of old guys, basically.
Yeah.
There was also a lack of scientific experts. Still, Holmes continued to make waves. Media attention. Theranos went live with their first wellness center in California after securing a partnership with Walgreens. And with Fortune's 2014 cover, Elizabeth Holmes' media presence skyrocketed.
And that's when the press coverage really started picking up, and you saw her almost once a week.
She was likened to highly successful entrepreneurs like Mark Zuckerberg and was often called the next Steve Jobs. She also made it onto the Forbes 400 list and was named the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world.
She was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. Wired called her work mind-blowing.
But while Holmes and Theranos received widespread praise and media attention, people were still curious as to how this revolution actually worked. The company was notoriously secretive, and Holmes was an expert at dodging questions about the process.
We've built additional services around this to begin to engage people and create that transparency as a vehicle for access.
Not everyone was entirely fooled by her storytelling, though. In his 2014 New Yorker profile, Ken Auletta described Holmes's explanations as, quote, comically vague. And her dodgy responses during that interview caught the eye of John Carreyrou, a journalist for the Wall Street Journal.
I learned early on by talking to laboratory scientists at universities, and the consensus among these scientists that I'd spoken to was that it wasn't possible.
Holmes and Theranos' downfall. Carreyrou's sources claimed that the majority of blood tests were done using third-party equipment, and that the Edison machines themselves didn't work. In other words, the company's test results were regularly inaccurate.
I wouldn't run them on myself. I wouldn't run them on my family members. And it just didn't make sense that internally we had so little faith in these tests, but we're still resulting them on patients.
Two of the whistleblowers who contributed to the expose were Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz. the latter of whom was the grandson of board member George Shultz. According to Chung, her concerns were dismissed by Holmes and Balwani.
What makes you think you're qualified to make that call? And you need to just sit down and do your job.
Thank you.
At that point, I knew it's just unacceptable what this company is doing, and I don't want to be a part of that.
So she and Shultz took their concerns to his grandfather, but he didn't bite either. They both ultimately left the company.
They're trying to convince me that you're stupid. They can't convince me that you're stupid, but they can convince me that you're wrong. And I do think that you're wrong. So move on with your life.
They were subsequently threatened with legal action and suspected they were being followed by private investigators. The Wall Street Journal article came out in October 2015, and Elizabeth Holmes didn't waste any time firing back and disputing the claims.
I personally was shocked to see that the Journal would publish something like this when we had sent them over 1,000 pages of documentation demonstrating that the statements in their piece were false.
But this was the beginning of the end for Theranos. Criminal charges. In March 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos Inc., and Sunny Balwani with massive fraud.
They're stripping her of control of the company. She is going to pay a $500,000 penalty and be barred from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 10 years, as well as returning the remaining 18.9 million shares.
And a few months later, Theranos was officially dissolved. The trial was delayed several times due to the COVID-19 pandemic and Holmes' pregnancy. That's right, she and her partner Billy Evans had a child in July 2021. On January 3, 2022, a jury found Holmes guilty of 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 of conspiracy to commit wire fraud.
When I heard that she was guilty, I wouldn't say that I was surprised, but I was interested in the way that it had broken down.
She was found not guilty of charges pertaining to defrauding or conspiring to defraud patients. Moreover, no verdict was reached on 3 of the other counts.
So that could be a potential mistrial on those counts, which could lay the basis for a further trial on those.
Balwani, meanwhile, will be tried later in the year. Holmes' sentencing will likely take place afterwards in September 2022. She faces up to 20 years in jail, a fine, and restitution, though many think she'll get off relatively easy.
Now, I don't think she's going to get 20 years on each one of those counts. I could be wrong. It's possible that she won't see jail time. I don't think that's likely either. I think she is probably now looking at jail.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. In the media. The story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos has been the subject of articles, books, and documentaries. And now, it's about to get the Hollywood treatment. Based on the ABC News podcast of the same name, Hulu's miniseries The Dropout premieres March 3rd, with Amanda Seyfried as Holmes.
This is an inspiring step forward.
This isn't just my job. This is who I am. Anybody who doubts my company doubts me.
Meanwhile, Adam McKay's film adaptation of John Carreyrou's book Bad Blood has found a home at Apple, though there's no official release date yet. That project will star Jennifer Lawrence as Theranos' founder and CEO. Needless to say, we likely won't stop hearing about Elizabeth Holmes anytime soon.
The world works in certain ways until a new great idea comes along and changes everything.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from MsMojo. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.